This, by the way, is my first video of 2025, so Happy New Year. There's a new tool for population compliance that I want to talk about today. In the past, this has been used to disrupt social media creators or internet platforms, for example, who go against the narrative. And now there's widespread use of this tool for individual disruption, and it's called debanking. This is quite a sledgehammer approach to control, short of imprisonment, but the surprising detail is how this is wielded against those with no appreciation of privacy and pseudo-anonymity. Debanking is 1,000 times more serious than just censorship. The problem is that this has been used as a political tool, especially in countries like the UK, Canada, and apparently also in the US. This is when banks blacklist you and you cannot get a bank account. It was used on Nigel Farage, the Brexit leader in the UK. It was used against the truckers protesting in Canada. It was used for political purposes even in the USA against persons deemed as having incompatible goals with the current government. It was used against internet platforms and creators. As you can see, in reality, dissenting views are not allowed, even with free speech laws. Originally, debanking was for legitimate banning of individuals that pose a risk to a bank, like those that have terrorist ties or drug cartel ties, for example. But those in power have figured out that this is an element that can be used to control the population, another disruption tool in a psyop. What is not discussed is how debanking is actually done. While you may think banks maintain lists of blacklisted people, the reality is scarier. You will need to know who controls the digital switches that trigger actions like debanking. And you will need to also know that if you are a target, there is no recourse, there is no appeal. These actions are above the law. You need a proper kind of mentality to prepare for this, as it may hit you unexpectedly. Let's talk about this in detail and also about the ways we can protect ourselves from it. Stay right there. Society has slowly manipulated us to behave in a certain way. For example, young people's lives are driven by a dependency on credit. For young families, credit is important to buy cars and homes, and a credit rating is important even for renting. Every aspect of their lives are tied to the credit score. And to build credit, young people must get into the habit of borrowing, even when they don't need to borrow. Fortunately, as we get older, the necessity of credit decreases, so we can care less about a credit score. But the debanking threat is a bit different, since debanking can immediately affect everyone regardless of age or financial status, because it controls access to your money. And evidence of uses of debanking shows that this is tied more to a social score. Let me give you a little background first, which developed the seriousness of the debanking threat. During the pandemic, there was a big rise in businesses that claim they only do contactless payments, which is a nice way of saying they don't want cash. Today, young people think nothing outside of convenience when they use an Apple Pay or Google Pay to pay for goods and services. Just like how the population is corralled into using surveillance phones to track their everyday lives, everything we do financially is now being put into the surveillance machine, and the normie accepts this without question. Around the same time as the pandemic, the Federal Reserve was reviewing the establishment of CBDC, or central bank digital currency. If this were ever implemented, it would have been a new element of control, since it would basically replace cash. Every financial flow would be digitally recorded and identified, and possibly shut down at will. Fortunately, since I last made a video on this a couple of years ago, nothing has happened on this front. Yet. Crypto is pretty heavily controlled too. In the US, it is definitely put under a surveillance microscope. You have very limited ability to quietly spend your crypto, and you can only buy crypto from a single place with full KYC. And the trick word here is KYC, Know Your Customer, or Show ID. So every financial transaction outside of cash is tied to an ID. As you can see from what I've explained, pretty much the majority of our financial lives are digitally recorded by some entity. And currently, every transaction we do revolves around a bank and supplying KYC. So think of the consequences when no bank allows you to open an account because you happen to appear on some blacklist with your KYC ID. You do not have to be as important as Nigel Farage in the UK. Imagine Canadian truckers being debanked just because they protested against the government. It would cause immediate financial ruin, especially if you're running a business like a trucking business and you cannot accept or disburse funds. In the US, apparently there is a financial regulation that identifies individuals as politically exposed persons, PEP, and that banks are obligated to remove these individuals from the banking system. I read this regulation, and it was originally made to identify foreign parties involved in money laundering and terrorist activities, but apparently a government in power can manipulate this definition. And the instrument of control here is through the bank examiner. Bank examiners work for the federal government or state governments. Thus, the government can determine that a bank is non-compliant if they do not enforce whatever the current definition is of debanking an identified PEP. Just to be clear, the regulations do not particularly define what a PEP is, so apparently it is subject to political interpretation. Now, whoever controls this definition can instigate debanking, and this is the sign of absolute abuse. Well-known people debanked in the US include Kanye West. And just like the censorship done on private social media platforms, debanking is a way to control speech. While the Constitution prevents a government from limiting freedom of speech, apparently they can cause private companies to take actions like debank or have a relationship with companies to do censorship and shut down opposing points of view. I always hear the arguments that censorship is allowed since private companies are not subject to the First Amendment. But that's apparently only okay if you're not the side being censored. This is actual proof that the government takes a direct hand in controlling speech, just like it did when FBI agents were directly dealing with Twitter to disrupt particular accounts. And this time through a more secret and shadowy way, like debanking. Remember when social media sites like Gab were stripped of access to credit card payments? Was that a decision made directly by companies like Stripe, MasterCard, and Visa? Or was that at the behest of a government invoking the PEP regulation? We don't really know for sure. From what I've read, the UK debanking was done via the use of third-party data aggregators that identified parties that should be debanked. This reminds me of the list made by the Southern Poverty Law Center that was used to identify people as domestic terrorists because they happened to be on the opposing political side. The SPLC list was used to ban people on social media specifically, and perhaps the same list was used to do debanking. The point is that some third-party private company accumulates information about each of us and access a centralized repository of our social score. There could be many companies that do this. How about the well-known social media aggregators that collect all your information based on your KYC IDs like Axiom and Intellius? Do they also give a social score? Do they rate you based on your support of particular political subjects like climate change, DEI, immigration, and so on? And I want to make it clear that you do not know what is being accumulated about you. You do not know if you're being graded with a social score. You do not know if you're floating to the top of the list. You do not know how many are on this list. The credit score is regulated. It has time limits and allows you to challenge what is recorded and dispute it. Hidden social score lists have no allowance for dispute. In the UK, the British bank HSBC was noted as doing heavy debanking, and reports I've read show that they made their decisions based on third-party lists. I'm curious about how they debank truckers in Canada. Would have been easy though. Someone could simply record the license plates of each participating truck and the owner identified through that and put on the list. In any case, it seems awfully clear now that we will all need to avoid being on any such list. This is the next level of abuse we can expect. Those of you who are overtly politically active in social media without any concern for privacy may already be targeted. Again, we don't know the definition of politically exposed persons, PEPs, in any particular government, and I'm sure with the change in administration, this will be revisited again. Apparently, Keir Starmer in the UK had a PEP classification and acted when he took office and started debanking opposition viewpoints and, of course, arresting them as well. But actually, the UK has no free speech law, so unfortunately for UK citizens, they can do this. And apparently 1 million people there had been debanked in what they now call a debanking scandal. However, it should be obvious that the source of data for being in this list are two elements: social media and KYC. If you speak your mind on social media and you neglected the KYC portion, then you will be zucked. If you don't have a bully pulpit of Brexit leader Nigel Farage or the fame of a Kanye West, then you perhaps should really think about your approach to social media and introduce the word privacy to your vocabulary. Remember the Microsoft mantra for Windows Copilot. The AI will see what you see, hear what you hear, know what you know. In other words, there's a running entity that can directly classify you as a target for debanking. This could be one of the surefire ways in the future to target the opposition extremely accurately. Ask the AI. The UK, by the way, was the only country to actually pass laws that supported client-side scanning, the actual tools used by the AI to spy on you on your own device. So what's the workaround here? I don't want to be repetitive with the same message in several videos, but there's only one answer. Do not use devices with embedded AI. iPhone 16s, Windows 11. You must use an open source operating system on your devices. Use Linux on your computers and phones, or a de-Googled OS on your Android phones. You must dump iPhones, particularly the iPhone 16. You must seriously limit your use of Windows for any personal use that would let Microsoft know what you know. Same with Apple products. Of course, if you are a conformist and compliant with whatever the current government desires, and you are never going to disagree, then you're safe. For now, until you begin to disagree. So don't do that because you're not allowed. And never let your device know you disagree. Remember, it's watching you. This is the first line of defense I've always talked about. You must take care to disrupt any connection of social media with your true identity. I have many videos on this, but the identifiers that you need to be concerned about are the Google ID, meaning Gmail. You need to have different phone numbers for social media versus your real-life contact numbers. You need different emails for social media versus what you use in normal communications. And for goodness sake, make sure it is not your real name. Your name in social media should not be your real name. As you know, this is not allowed in Facebook. So the only answer is, do not be on Facebook. You must protect your IP address as this is your internet identity. Use a VPN, use Starlink or Cell Data to keep them from recording your home IPv4 address. The term that you should be familiar with is pseudo-anonymity. This means you have some pen name on social media, and this represents your social media identity. But keep this away from your financial or real-life activities, as they will be connected. If you do not take the precautions I've stated so far, then your only choices are A, compliance and subservience, or B, silence. But be cautious, as this does not erase the past. As you can see, without privacy, does freedom really exist? I think not, except for a privileged few with power and money. The problem that you should be concerned about is the sudden recognition that you've been targeted. Like I said, in the UK, according to Nigel Farage, possibly the next Prime Minister of the UK, around 1 million people have been targeted for debanking. And I'm sure many more have been targeted by their law enforcement or via social media censorship. What number has been affected in the US? Mark Andreessen said in an interview with Joe Rogan that he personally knows many associates that have been debanked. So you see, everyone can be vulnerable. The proper action to take as aware people is to diversify financially. It will be clear that some amounts of cash need to be available in reserve for emergencies. Don't be like the young people who don't carry a single dollar bill in their wallet. Change habits. Have a good amount in cash reserves. At the moment, cash is still king. The percentage use of cash has declined heavily since the pandemic, but let's begin to raise this number again and restore it to prior levels for our own protection. Be careful about KYC. Judge for yourself if an entity is deserving of KYC. Does Facebook deserve KYC? Hell no. The advantage of cash is that it is a no KYC transaction by default, whereas purchases by credit and debit cards are naturally tied to KYC. There's no getting around this. Anytime you deal with a bank or credit card, they will demand KYC information, and all your information will be reported to the credit agencies. Be aware of that, and that's why I choose to separate personal financial transactions from social media so they cannot match KYC, and don't provide KYC willy-nilly, which, by the way, is called 2FA, two-factor authentication. If you have reserves, it may be best to distribute monies into different financial institutions. Although PEP rules can be implemented for all banks, they may not implement events like debanking at the same time. So you may have some time to maneuver if one particular bank acts first. I have not researched this, but there may be value in keeping some monies in foreign banks, maybe like James Bond with a Swiss bank account. Some of you may be better experts at this, and let us know in the comments. The easiest way to diversify today is with crypto. And unfortunately, this is heavily tied to KYC, but I'll discuss some ways around this. First, in the US, the only easy way to buy crypto is through Coinbase. Coinbase is heavily regulated and reports capital gains to the IRS as well as large purchases. However, think about this. If, let's say, you buy Bitcoin and you immediately spend it by moving it to another wallet, then the KYC at Coinbase pretty much ends immediately. And they report only above a certain dollar limit. There's no further reporting done since you've zeroed out your account. Now, if you want the tracking of Bitcoin, for example, you can do a swap to a different crypto. For example, you can exchange BTC for a crypto like USDC or USDT, which are dollar index crypto. They will never change in value with respect to the dollar. Alternatively, you can convert Bitcoin to privacy coins like Monero and then change it back to another crypto. This just removes the immediate connection. By the way, forget the concerns about crypto having no asset basis. This is a pretty lame argument in my book. Financial institutions are buying and selling billions of crypto daily. It is no longer at the person-to-person level. Now, spending crypto has its limits, but it can be sufficient for survival in an emergency. For example, the company BitPay supports the buying of products from many companies, including Home Depot, Best Buy, Pottery Barn, tons of restaurants, airlines, and even gift cards from Amazon or eBay. However, each particular seller may have daily, monthly, or annual limits. There's also a BitPay limit that triggers KYC if you use a VPN and spend over $3,000. So spend it outside your home without the VPN and don't exceed the limit. I don't know what can happen. I can only warn you of technological tools being used against us daily. So I'm just giving you a prepping heads up, and always think outside of the matrix. Be distrustful of the system. As you can see, we just discovered another way those in power can abuse it. Folks, if you're still here, then this is the sponsorship part of the video, and I sponsor myself, and this keeps this channel and content coming to you. Thank you for supporting this channel. I've created several products that help us achieve the goals I've stated in this video. The first critical tool is to have the right phone, and the best no identity phone is our new Brax 3 phone, available for pre-order on Indiegogo. This uses an open source OS and is invisible to big tech, so it is a key ingredient to protecting your identity. Next, we have tools like the Brax Virtual Phone. This gives you additional phone numbers that have no KYC and thus can be used for your social media accounts, separate from your normal phone numbers. We also have Braxmail, which allows you to create unlimited aliases for use in social media sites and online stores. We have Bytes VPN and Brax Router, which is used to protect your IP address on your home network. We also have the Google phone for those of you on Verizon or wanting a Google Pixel phone. All of these are on our store on our site, Brax.me. Join us there together with the over 100,000 users that discuss privacy issues daily. Thanks for watching, and Happy New Year.